Giro. Advance Australia in fair Verona.
Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. This week I will wrap up an edition of the Giro d'Italia in which the outcome of 3 weeks and 3,500 kilometres of racing was decided on a 3-kilometre stretch of road. I will also look back at one of the busiest weeks of racing of the whole season so far, with the Tour of Norway, the LOTTO Thüringen Rundfahrt, RideLondon, Boucles de la Mayenne, the Grand Prix Marcel Kint and the Circuit de Wallonie. So with all that racing to get through, I'd better crack on, and I will start with the Giro d'Italia. Yesterday, Jai Hindley made history by becoming the first Australian ever to win that race. He lost the race on the final time trial stage 19 months ago in the 2020 edition, and after a low-key 2021, many were questioning whether or not it was a fluke in the most unusual of circumstances. He has now, though, proven the doubters wrong, beating a bona fide Grand Tour champion in Richard Carapaz, winner of this race in 2019. Now, I normally use the Racing News Show after a Grand Tour to focus on and pick apart the key moments that won the race. But in this instance, it was a stretch of road just 3 kilometres long that made the difference. For 19 stages, Hindley and Carapaz were never separated by more than 10 seconds, and going into stage 20, there was only 3 seconds between them. There was nothing to separate them on any of the major climbs until we got to the Marmolada, or the Passo Fedaia. Carapaz was clearly confident there. He sent his Ineos Grenadiers teammates to the front to control things, the last of those being Pavel Sivakov, who was asked to set such a high pace that the group was down to just a handful of riders by the time he pulled off. Carapaz attacked immediately afterwards, a clear indication to me at least that he was confident in his form and strength on the day. But as had so often been the case, Hindley was every bit his match. Hindley then countered, but on this occasion, he kept the pace high despite the fact that Carapaz was still glued to his back wheel. And for very good reason. In the distance up the road, he could see his teammate Lennard Kämna. Now, many of us had been questioning the presence of Kämna in breakaways for so many of the mountain stages. This time, it was a tactical masterclass. The German gave it all he had left, and slowly but surely, Carapaz was cracking. His body language changed, a grimace appeared, a few centimetres opened up between him and Hindley. After what had been a disappointing stage to that point, I think we all have to admit, the drama was intense in that moment. By the time that Kämna pulled off, his job for the day and the race done, that gap of centimetres had become metres. And adding insult to injury, Kämna stuck to the back wheel of Carapaz and even went past him at one point on the climb. Carapaz did his very best to limit his losses, but his morale must have sunk even further when Carthy and Landa caught and passed him. By the time he eventually crossed the finish line, he'd lost 1 minute and 28 seconds to Hindley, and whilst it was nice to see the support from Davide Formolo as he crossed that line, it would have been little consolation. For Hindley, the emotions of the day couldn't really have been more contrasting. He dreamt of putting time into Carapaz ahead of that final time trial, but not even in his wildest dreams could he have expected to go into that time trial with a 1 minute 25 second buffer. Barring disaster, he'd won the Giro d'Italia. I did love the way he received his first pink jersey of the race. Someone chucked it over to him during his post-race interview. Brilliant. This, though, was Robbie McEwen's reaction on the breakaway after Hindley went into pink on stage 20.
You can understand Jai Hindley not wanting to smile too much, celebrate too much, because he went through the heartbreak 2 years ago of losing on the final day, but he went in with really no lead on equal time going into the final time trial. Now with 1 minute and 25, I mean, everybody around the world's going to say, it's over, he cannot lose it. It'd take an absolute disaster for him to lose the Giro, but he's aware of that. So he is just going to try and stay concentrated. He doesn't want that sort of decompression and then underperform in the final time trial. But I bet you inside, it's just bubbling up and so excited. And I'm just so happy for him.
On the final day's time trial, Matteo Sobrero, who'd been on an energy-saving mission over the mountains of the final week, blitzed around the 17-kilometre course in Verona, winning the stage by 22 seconds from Tayman Allensman, with Van der Poel finishing a Grand Tour for the first time in third place on that final time trial. Now, he might only have come away with one stage win, Van der Poel, but the race, I think it's safe to say, would have been far worse off without him being there. Now, looking at the rest of the final week, it was a good one for the breakaways. Every single road stage of the final week was won from a breakaway. Jan Hirt won the Queen stage on Tuesday through sheer dogged determination. Santiago Buitrago broke the heart of Gijs Leemreize the following day to become the youngest Colombian ever to win a stage of the Giro. Dries de Bont broke the hearts of every sprinter left in the race after he and his breakaway companions thwarted the bunch in fine style, whilst Koen Bouwman took a second stage win on day 19 in what many saw as a controversial finish. It was also a day in which he mathematically won the King of the Mountains competition. And finally, Alessandro Covi of UAE Team Emirates not only won stage 20, but also picked up the Cima Coppi Prize as the first rider over the top of the Passo Fedaia, the highest point of this year's race. And you have to feel a little bit for Covi, because most people's eyes at that point were on the GC battle behind him. That was by far the biggest win of his career so far, so hats off to him. And I'd also like to give a nod to Richie Porte. The Giro marked the Australian's final Grand Tour, but he succumbed to illness on stage 19 and was not able to finish. But he can be immensely proud of his achievements over these last 13 seasons as a pro rider. He's done an awful lot for the profile of cycling on Australia, and whilst he'd be disappointed for his teammate Richard Carapaz and in his own demise at the race, I'm sure he'll also be delighted to see an Australian win the race for the very first time. Now, whilst there was no doubt that this Giro provided suspense, many of you were disappointed by the lack of drama in the GC battle. And I'd like to ask you at home what you thought of this edition. What would you rate this Giro out of 10? Let me know in the comment section just down below. My personal thoughts are that the high mountains did not quite provide the entertainment that we'd hoped for. Two of the standout stages for me were the circuit races around Napoli and Torino. And I wonder if that's because they provided more scope for inventive racing. Maybe Grand Tour organisers will have been watching on to see what they can learn for their own Grand Tours. Again, you can let me know your thoughts on that on the comments below. What would you do to spice things up in Grand Tours? If anything, maybe you love them exactly how they are. Anyway, this is how things finished on the final general classification. Hindley taking it by 1 minute and 18 seconds from Carapaz, with Mikel Landa in third. Just the second time he's been on the final podium of a Grand Tour, the other one being the Giro d'Italia in 2015. And whilst it was an unremarkable ride compared to what we've come to expect from him, I'm glad to see him string 3 consistent weeks together. Vincenzo Nibali ended his last Giro with a very respectable 4th place overall, his 16th top 7 result at a Grand Tour. He might not have threatened the win, he might not have taken a stage win, but my word, does he have a lot to be proud about. And the same can be said for Intermarché Wanty Gobert, who placed Jan Hirt in 6th and Pozzovivo 8th despite his crash. And with 2 stage wins to boot, you can safely say they performed well above the expectations that their team budget would give us all. Pello Bilbao finished in 5th on GC despite all the hard work he did for Landa, and it was Buchmann, Carthy and Lopez who filled the other positions in the top 10. Lopez of Trek Segafredo also came away with the white jersey, although that probably wouldn't have been the case had Joao Almeida not had to abandon with a COVID positive over the final week. Koen Bouwman, as I mentioned, took the mountains classification, Demar the points and Bahrain victorious the teams. Just before I finish with the Giro though, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who watched our coverage of the race. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. And I'd also like to thank everyone behind the scenes who worked tirelessly to make that coverage what it was. We will be back for more at the Tour de France in a few weeks' time, so I hope you will join us for that if you are able to do so. Right, I'm going to move on now to what we've got coming up for you on GCN Plus this week, and our attention is already turning to the Tour de France because the key warm-up race, the Criterium du Dauphiné, starts on Sunday. Primoz Roglic will use that race as his return to competition for the first time since the Tour of the Basque Country. A knee injury kept him away from the Spring Classics, but he has been training at altitude with the team, and so we'll get an insight into his form just weeks before the start of Le Grand Boucle. And the same goes for his teammate Wout van Aert, who was on that same training camp. Last week, Jumbo-Visma revealed that they're aiming for both the yellow and the green jersey at the Tour de France, so the Dauphiné will be a good testing ground to see if they can both work towards different goals at a race. We also have a couple of one-day races for you this week with the Mersan Tour Classic Alpes-Maritimes tomorrow, a mountainous race in France in which Chris Froome and Jakob Fuglsang are amongst the riders taking part. That one's available in all territories, and on Sunday It's the Brussels Cycling Classic. That one you'll be able to watch if you're in Europe plus the Asia Pacific, excluding China, Japan and New Zealand. On top of that, we're also going to have daily highlights of the Adriatica Ionica stage race in Italy, which we'll get up for you just as soon as we possibly can each day. There are also some territory restrictions on that one, so please check what is available where you are. Next up, the Tour of Norway, which was one of, if not the most beautiful race in the world from what I saw over the last 6 days. Check out these incredible aerial shots. Absolutely stunning. And the racing wasn't too shabby either, albeit dominated by one man, Remco Evenepoel. He won an uphill sprint on day one. He took the Queen stage with an incredible display of climbing prowess on stage 3. And then he won a flat sprint from a small group on stage 5. Ethan Hayter and Marco Haller also picked up stage wins along the way, and for the latter, it was his first win in the pro ranks in 7 years. The race also had a fitting finale with a stage win on the 6th and final stage for Alexander Kristoff. He got the better of Ethan Vernon and Mads Pedersen. It was a comfortable victory for Evenepoel in the general classification though, with almost a minute of an advantage over Jai Vine of Alpecin Fenix in second, with another Australian, Luke Plapp, in third. Evenepoel will next compete at the Tour de Suisse, which starts in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm really interested to see just how well he goes there. Over here in the UK, the first 2 stages of Ride London were dominated by one woman, Lorena Wiebes. She was in a class of her own in both sprints, coming to the line so far ahead of world champion Elisa Balsamo on day one that I thought there might be a time gap given between them. There wasn't one given by the UCI commissaires, but it certainly wasn't a photo finish, let's put it that way. And nor was it the following day into Epping, where she comfortably outsprinted former world champion Marta Bastianelli. And she finished it off in the perfect style on the 3rd and final stage around central London. Now, we saw Demi Vollering win every stage and the GC at the Tour of the Basque Country recently, and Wiebes managed to pull off an equally impressive performance at Ride London to do exactly the same thing. Charlotte Kool gave her one of the longest lead-outs I think I've ever seen, and once Wiebes came off her wheel, there was not really any doubt of who would take the win, particularly as Balsamo, for some reason, decided to go on the other side of Kool rather than stay in the slipstream of Wiebes. Those 3 days doubled the win tally of Wiebes in 2022, going from 4 wins before the race to 8 afterwards. She really is in a league of her own now when it comes to sprinting. Meanwhile, we also had the 6-stage LOTTO Thüringen Rundfahrt in Germany last week, and since it clashed with Ride London, the field didn't really have the quality of previous years, and there was only one World Tour team present in the form of Bike Exchange Jayco. And they took full advantage of that. Alexandra Manley won stages 1, 3 and 4, and Georgia Baker the 2nd stage, making it a clean sweep up to that point. Jose Bean, who commentated on the race for us, told me that they were both part of the Australian Olympic team pursuit squad that became world champions in 2019, and now they've both got their first pro wins in Germany last week. On stage 5, which was the longest of the race, they let one rider up the road with 95 kilometres to go. At 53 to go, when we crossed the finish line for the first time, it was only 31 seconds, but Buryakova, the 24-year-old Ukrainian from Arkea Samsic, managed to get it back up to 1 minute. Bike Exchange clearly wanted to defend the yellow jersey and were less interested in another stage win. And the other teams with 3 riders in the first group left it too late. And so Buryakova pulled off one of the most impressive victories of recent times. A 95-kilometre solo win is one of the longest winning attacks in modern cycling, right up there with Annemiek van Vleuten's win in Harrogate at the World Championships, or Lizzie Deigner's win in Paris-Roubaix last year. The race may not be quite the same level, but you have to tip your hat nonetheless. Well done. That also marked her first ever win in the pro ranks, incidentally. On the 6th and final stage, we were back to normality. Alexandra Manley not only sealed the deal in the overall classification, but she also took the 4th stage win of the week. That meant 5 in total for the Australian in 6 days. Not bad going. Marta Lack and Femke Gerritsen rounded off the overall podium at that race. Now, along with the stage racing, we also had a couple of one-day races last week, including the Grand Prix Marcel Kint yesterday. 195 kilometres featuring 2 ascents of both the Oude Kwaremont and the Paterberg. Now, the race split to pieces on those climbs, with Sepp van Marken forcing the pace and turning back the clock, which was brilliant to watch, I've got to say. The early breakaway fought bravely all day, however, with 3 riders, Fouché, Hulgaard and Helderman, staying out from this initial 7-rider break. They only got caught inside 2 kilometres to go. Arkea Samsic chased hard, but their efforts were in vain and they didn't place a rider in the top 10 at the finish. It would be LOTTO Soudal who played a blinder. South African champion Reinhard Janse van Rensburg beasting a lead out and delivering 20-year-old Arno de Lee to the line. De Lee kicked hard and won by 2 bike lengths to take the win there. Luca Mazzato for B&B Hotels was in second and Gerben Thijssen in third on the day. And a few days before that, we had the Circuit de Wallonie. That came down to a sprint with a final kick to the line deciding the winner. Alex Zinglet of Cofidis had got a gap with Philippe Gilbert immediately jumping clear to try and close it. The Belgian didn't quite make it, however, and that gap hovered at around 10 metres with 500 metres still remaining. The Italian Andrea Pasqualon of Intermarché made the most of Gilbert's effort, using his draft and kicking off the wheel to close Zinglet, just catching him on the line to take another win for Intermarché this season. Zinglet had to set up a second with Gilbert in third. And finally this week, it was the 47th edition of the Boucles de la Mayenne in France. A group of 6 was caught on the final finishing lap on day 1 in Endoué. Jason Tesson got the better of Bram Welton at the line after what was a fairly chaotic final without a lead out. The following day, a World Tour rider took centre stage with Benjamin Thomas of Cofidis, who outsprinted the rest of the field on what was another hectic finale. On to stage 3, and there was a very strong breakaway that went up the road. It included Greg Van Avermaet, Connor Swift and former race winner Anthony Turgis, but once again, it was caught, although only just. So close was it, in fact, that the bunch sprint took place around the breakaway riders that were being caught inside of the line. Emerging triumphant from it was Amaury Capiot of Arkea Samsic, who just edged out Christopher Halverson of Uno X. So Benjamin Thomas took a 3-second lead over Kuznefroy into the 4th and final stage, and he would have been thankful that it ended up in a bunch sprint. And it was 2 South Americans who took the top 2 spots, with Juan Sebastian Milano taking the win ahead of Venezuela's Luis Ooyy. Now, with Kuznefroy not taking any bonus seconds, Thomas claimed the overall victory for Team Cofidis. A thoroughly entertaining race to watch, I've got to say. And I wonder whether that was down to the 6-man teams there, which always makes it very difficult to control, but also the multiple finishing circuits used. Just before I finish with that race, though, I loved this spectator at the end of stage 3 who held up her dog so that he or she could have a decent view of the finish. I hope they appreciated that. Now, the only other bit of news that I have for you this week is that Peter Sagan has confirmed that he will compete at Unbound Gravel this year alongside Daniel Oss before they head over to the Tour de Suisse and the Tour de France. He won't be in the 200-mile event, though, but the 100-miler. It is his first ever gravel race, and maybe, like Mathieu van der Poel, he's got one eye on the inaugural World Championships taking place later this year. Right, that is all from me. I am off for a week of what I hope I can say is well-earned rest. Thanks for watching, everyone. I will see you very soon.